Let's start with a word of prayer. Father, I pray for people that are running late tonight because of the railroad crossings down the road here, which is causing people to go out of their way. I pray that you'll help everybody to find their way and get here safely, both with children and those that are coming out here. Thank you for each person that is here, that we can gather together for another night. And Lord, I just ask you to bless the children, bless their teachers and their helpers, bless the girls, my granddaughter Jenna and her two friends, and Joanna, that are leading the kids in their singing with emotions. Bless them in doing that. Bless the people that are doing the crafts with the kids, those that are doing specialty things. I just pray that you'll enable them and help them. Bless Kayla as she's in the nursery with the really little ones, that you'll help her to have a good time as well. And Lord, just keep everybody safe here tonight, especially the kids as they play games and so forth. And Father, for us, just help us to understand. Help me in teaching these things to make things simple and to make them clear so that they can be understood, because it's so important that we learn about the things that we've been learning about. So Father, thank you for what you're going to do through the power of your Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. So last night we were learning about angels, and that's always an interesting study. There's more things that could be said. And what I'm sort of planning to do is Friday night for our last night, just sort of cap these things off, and then I'm going to leave a lot of that evening just for sort of like discussion. Sort of like Martin just asked a question for clarity on something. We can do stuff like that. So, not that you can't ask questions tonight or any other night, because you're certainly welcome to. But that's sort of what we will do. Tonight, I've entitled tonight, Satan's Unsafe Playground. Satan's Unsafe Playground. Satan has a lot of toys in his toy box to get us and people ensnared into a bondage to him and into trouble. In John chapter 10 and verse 10, there's a very important verse that says that Jesus says, the thief. And when he's talking about the thief here, he's talking about Satan. He is a thief. So I call it Satan and company. That's Satan and all the wicked spirits. The thief comes only, it's an important word, he comes only to steal, to kill, and destroy. Three things. He comes to steal. He wants to steal your joy, your happiness, your freedom. He wants to steal you away from God as a believer. He wants to kill. He is a killer. Jesus said in John chapter 8, I think it's verse 44, he's a murderer from the beginning. And I have a very firm conviction, as do a lot of other people that have taught this subject and written books. I firmly believe that Satan would kill every one of us in an instant because we're God's children, if God would grant him permission. I mean, as Jesus said it here, he only has one agenda, and it's to steal people's joy. I mean, there's so many people that their lives are wrecked, not just because they don't have joy, but he fills them with anxiety and worry, and he fills them with guilt for their past sin, which they're not guilty for anymore because it's forgiven. He's just a thief, but he's also a killer. Jesus said he was a murderer from the beginning, and he would love to murder. So, and he also comes to destroy. He would like to, let's see, there's two seats there. Oh, there's one over there. If you want to pull the chairs together, you can. So you can sit with your buddies. We don't mind. Anyway, so the thief, Satan, comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And here's the flip side of that. Jesus said, "But I, Jesus, have come that they might have life." And the "they" is humanity. He wants humanity to have life. And to have it to the full, which in the original means to have it in great abundance, overflowing abundance. He just doesn't want you to live life. He wants you to really, really, really enjoy life to the fullest measure that you can. So you see the contrast in the battle. Satan is here to destroy people's lives, their family life. He's here to destroy their personal peace. He's here to destroy our satisfaction. If you're a Christian, he's here to destroy your testimony. He's here to just destroy anything that he can. Because I've known over my lifetime so many Christians whose lives have been destroyed because the enemy got a foothold in their life and used it to his advantage and destroyed their family, destroyed their kids. Didn't kill them, but destroyed them. Family came apart and is apart. So we see so much of that. But on the other hand, Jesus is our best friend. And he's here to help us to really live our lives to the fullest. He wants us to get the most out of life. We're not just here to take up space. Like I said on Sunday morning, there's a lot of people out there just occupying space, not knowing what the purpose of life is, why they're here, where they came from, where they're going. No, he wants us to be totally filled with joy and with satisfaction. He wants to abundantly bless us. So God, as we start this tonight, talking about Satan's unsafe playground, and that's the world. But it's an unsafe place. It's a fallen place. And Satan and powers of darkness are dangerous, as we just saw. But God always wanted, and he still wants his people to be different from the rest of people that are not followers of God and from the culture that's around us. Our culture in this country is decaying swiftly, and we're seeing it breaking up all around us right now. Things that we used to think are good are now evil, and things that are evil are now standard. And every day you hear more, and our streets are filled with violence, and that's increasing. So, but God wants us, who call ourselves Christians, followers of Jesus. It began in the Old Testament. His people were Israel, the Jewish people, and he always wanted them, and I'm going to give you some verses here in a moment. He always wanted them to be different than the other nations, different in the way that they lived. And he wanted them to be obedient to him, loving to each other. And he wants that for us today. Now, in the book of Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, in chapter 18, I'm going to read beginning at verse 9 through verse 14. This is sort of going to set the stage for tonight. Now, you know that he promised Israel that he was going to bring them into a land of plenty. He called it a land flowing with milk and honey. Is there a chair back there? There's two up here.
Oh.
Yeah, right here. You'll be close to the action up here. Maybe too close, Amanda. I don't know. Anyway, so in Deuteronomy chapter 18, we have what is the most thorough couple verses about what we're not supposed to be involved in. He was saying this to Israel. He said, when I bring you into the land that I'm going to bring you into, which is now the land of Israel, actually it was bigger in that time than what the landmass is today. He's saying to them, I'm going to take this land away from other pagan nations. When I bring you into the land that I'm bringing you into, I don't want you to adopt any of the practices of these people because their practices are detestable to me. So don't get involved in them. And that still stands, even though that's the Old Testament. He hasn't switched and said, okay, it's the New Covenant now, you people that are Christians can get involved in this. No, it's the same for us. So he says, when in verse 9 of Deuteronomy 18, when you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving to you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. And there were multiple nations that were living in that land at the time. He says, let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire. That was child sacrifice. One of the gods of some of those nations was a god called Molech. And Molech, they fashioned an idol. It was made out of metal. And he was in a sitting position with his arms out like this. And it was hollow. And they would make a roaring fire, and the metal would heat up and it would glow. And in order to appease Molech, they would sacrifice some of their children by laying them and burning them alive in the arms of Molech. I mean, if you can imagine that. I mean, that's what they did. And there were other variations, different gods, different nations had, and in different ways they human sacrifice. They sacrificed their children. And they were glad to do it because they were trying to appease their God. But he says, let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire, and who practices divination. We'll talk more about each of these a little bit more tonight, so I'm not really going to get into them right now. Who practices divination or sorcery, who interprets omens, who engages in witchcraft, and there are various kinds of witchcraft as we'll learn, or casts spells, or who is a medium, or a spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord, and because of these detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. God was going to give Israel their land, but he's driving them out because they're detestable in his sight because of these things that they're doing. God is bringing judgment against those nations. They're going to lose their land. In fact, they lost their lives because he used Israel as his instrument of judgment. They came against those nations, and they killed them. They drove them out. And then he says in verse 13, you must be blameless before the Lord your God. The nations you will dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery or divination. But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. He says their problem is that they're involved in all these practices that I forbid. They're terrible to me. They're detestable. So don't be involved in them. Jeremiah chapter 10 in the Old Testament says basically the same thing. This is what the Lord says. Do not learn the ways of the nations, or be terrified by the signs in the sky, though the nations are terrified by them. And then in verse 3, the first phrase in verse 3 says, for the customs of the people are worthless. And then he goes on for the rest of verse 3, 4, and into 5, describing about how they make idols that are worthless. They make an idol out of wood, and they use some silver, some other precious metals, and they adorn them, and they pray to them, but they're worthless. They can't do anything. They're just idols. But the Bible also tells us that behind every idol is a major demon, powerful demon behind every idol. They're also behind every religion, because God hates religion. Religion is detestable to God because all religions are man-made. They originate, religion by its nature originates with a man or with a group of people, and they come up with ways to make God happy, their God, whatever their God is. They come up with ways to get to their heaven or their paradise or nirvana. Whatever it is that their ultimate end is, or their ultimate state. They make things like that up. Biblical Christianity is not a religion. It's a relationship. So I've said this before on Sunday mornings. Always think about two R's. One is for religion, one is for relationship. God hates religion. Doesn't work. It's man-made. It's always a system of man doing something to make God happy and to get to some ultimate goal, whether it's heaven or paradise, as I just said, nirvana, some state of mind that they think is perfect. But God isn't into religion. And he showed that he wasn't even into the Jewish people and their religion in the New Testament. When you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, one of the things that's very easy that I just love about it is the fact that whenever he was dealing with the religious leaders, who were the Pharisees or the Sadducees, he called them a bunch of snakes. He called them whitewashed tombs. You're beautiful on the outside, filled with death. So, I mean, that's what he was saying to the preachers and the people that led the religion. But do you notice that he was always hanging out with the sinners? And the sinners were the people that the Pharisees were supposed to be ministering to, but they didn't like them. They looked down on sinners. Jesus lifted sinners up. Jesus constantly went to people's homes for dinner or for parties, and the Pharisees got terribly upset because they couldn't understand, if he claims to be from God, why is he hanging out with sinners? Tax collectors were like the most hated of people because they really ripped off the people. They were collecting taxes, and they were doing it for Rome, so the Jewish people hated them. There were prostitutes there. There were a lot of, we would call them drunkards there. But that's who Jesus hung out with. And he didn't hang out with them to participate with them. He hung out with them to show them a new way of life. He loved them. And many of them became his followers. And so, anyway, he was not into religion. He's into us having a relationship with him. And the relationship that we have with Christ is not a religion. It's a relationship. People say to me when they find out I'm a preacher or something, well, what religion are you? And then I shock them. I say, I don't have a religion. And they look at me, well you're a preacher. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not into religion. I said, I'm into a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, my Savior. That's what the Bible's about. It can bring up some pretty interesting conversations, let me tell you. Then in Ephesians chapter 5, it says, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness. That's with Satan and company. Don't participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness. That's some of the things that we read there in the Old Testament. But instead, even expose them. We're not supposed to participate in this stuff. We're supposed to expose this stuff. We're supposed to know that it's wrong and tell others about it. Now, I'm going back to Deuteronomy chapter 18 here right now, verses 9 to 14. And I'm going to use some of the lists there to talk about some things that says are we're not to be a part of. And this particular passage is the most exhaustive list, even though it's not exhaustive, but it's the one that lists the most things. There's some other things mentioned in other parts of Scripture, and we'll get to that. But let me begin by saying this. Let me begin by an illustration to sort of paint a picture why I called this Satan's unsafe playground, because of all the tools that he has. Let's suppose that I invite you over to my house, and I tell you, just come in, make yourself at home. My house is your house. You can go anywhere. We don't care. Outside, you can roam around. It's like 50 acres. You can go wherever you want. But there's a fenced yard, part of the backyard. And we have a dog. Now, we don't really have a dog like this, but for the illustration, I'm going to say we have a dog. And it's not a safe dog, okay? We do have one little one that sort of nips at people's heels sometimes. But I'm talking about a really unsafe dog. This is a big dog. I'm not going to use this specific. It's a mixed breed of several breeds that can bite, all right? So I say to you, and there's signs on the fence and on the gates that say, beware of dog, Okay, so that's a warning. Beware of the dog. And I say to you, go anywhere you want, just don't go in the backyard. Because if you go in the backyard, there's a high probability you're going to get hurt. You're going to get bit. I can't guarantee that you will, but you'll probably get hurt. So I'm just telling you. Okay? So beware. Don't go in there. So some yo-yo actually goes in there, and the dog really tears him up, and he's all bleeding. And I'm like, what the heck happened? Well, your dog bit me. I told you not to go in there. It's not my fault. It's your fault for being stupid, and not listening to the warning. Well, in the same way, in God's backyard, this planet, Satan has a playground where he has unsafe dogs. He has games that you can play. There's all sorts of activities, things you can get involved in, things you can do. But God has already said, because He's the owner, don't get involved in these things. Because if you do, you're probably going to get hurt. It's going to affect your life, and the consequences aren't going to be good. And so that's what we're looking at tonight. So here he says, don't imitate the detestable ways of these nations that are there. So the first one he says is I think is very key. And most of us just look at that and say, well, we wouldn't do that. I mean, we're civilized people. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire. We don't do that. There are people that do. They don't sacrifice him in the fire. But there are people that worship Satan that participate in human sacrifice. And babies, many times, are their victims, or small children, or runaway teenagers, or drifters that they pick up. Because somebody asked me one time when I was teaching on this, that I've actually dealt with people in the past, quite a number of them, that were hardcore Satanists and that participated in animal and human sacrifice. And they're always like, well, where do they get one people be missing? I think that just blew over. Either that or a very small child teaming around. Because I can't see a body back there. Or maybe the enemy wanted to know what we're talking about in here. No, I don't want to freak you out. That's not happening. I just thought I'd throw that in for free. So I know this is a very serious thing, and it's a very alarming thing, and a lot of people don't believe it happens, but it happens more than you realize, and it happens in this area. So within the cult, they have breeders, they're called, women who have babies, and those babies never get out in society. They're taken and they even plan some of the births so that they come at certain dates in the year close to it, so they have a baby to sacrifice. So they're not usually stealing babies; they use their own. But over the years, they also get a lot of teenagers that are in rebellion and running away, and they pick them up and they use them. There's also a lot of drifters, hitchhikers, people just drifting around. They get those, and so they use them. It's a very real thing. Now, I'm going to say something here that's a very touchy subject, so I'm going to follow it up with something to take the edge off of that. But in America, we have sacrificed over 60 million of our babies in abortion since the 70s when it was legalized. That's sacrificing your children. Whether people want to believe that or not. But here's what I like to say, because this is going to be online, and who knows who's listening. And I always say when I talk about abortion, there is forgiveness. So, because I've always had women that would come to me and say, well, I had an abortion years ago, or men that say, I paid for my girlfriend abortion. And if you have to understand something. That is killing a baby. It's not just tissue. It's a real human being with a heartbeat. And that's a serious thing, but God is a forgiving God, and if we confess it as sin, He's able to forgive. He does forgive. And and then you're fine. You'll never be brought into judgment for that. We had a young lady, a young mother here, it's quite a few years ago, and she came, she wanted to make an appointment with me, so she came into my office, which was in town at the time, and she said when I was 16, I had an abortion. My boyfriend and I were having a baby, and we weren't married, and my mom wanted me to have an abortion, so I went to the clinic, and she said I was barely 16. She just turned 16. She said, and they told me it's not a baby, it's just tissue. And she said I believed them, but now I know different. It was a baby, but I didn't know that back. But I also knew of her at that time. I didn't know her well, and I knew that she had ended up in Hershey because she had tried to commit suicide. And through some relatives, I found out what had happened. But anyway, so when she came to, and she told me that she was thinking about suicide, she was in the hospital for a while, and she said, but I live with this every day, that I murdered my unborn baby. And she said, I just can't stand the weight of it anymore, the guilt of it. So I said, well, God forgives. I said, and I mean, He forgives. Paul in the New Testament was guilty of murder, and he became the greatest apostle of all of them, and wrote most of the New Testament books, and God used him, and God can use you. And so I led her through a prayer of confession, which was a very tearful experience. And when it was over, I said to her, I said, now you're going to, when you get to heaven, you're going to have another child, because she had 2 little boys at the present time. And then that stopped her in her tracks. I'll never forget it. She said, oh my, are you serious? If it's a boy or a girl, it's going to really be bad at me. I said, no, there's no anger in heaven. I said, your baby's been raised by God in heaven. I said, it's never known any sin. It's never known any anger or unforgiveness. It's with God who's forgiving. I said, you're gonna meet it. It's gonna meet you, and it's gonna be wonderful. And she said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, I was in heaven." I said, "It's gonna be good." And later, she said she gave her testimony in church one time after that, and she said, "When I walked out of Pastor Bill's office, I felt like a house had been lifted off of me. I was free." So I'm just going to say to anybody that's going to be watching this, yes, we've done the same thing that these people were doing, that God was going to drive out before Israel. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices a son or daughter in the fire. We don't sacrifice them in the fire, but we sacrifice, we take their life away. So that's a big one. And we need to understand that. But that God is a forgiving God. I mean, you think there's over 60 million little babies in heaven. I mean, they might have been destroyed in the womb, but their life is real. And it's fantastic when you think about it. My wife, Chris, says, the only thing good that I can think about an abortion is those babies went straight to heaven. She said, not that I'm glad, but at least that's something that comes out of that. They go straight to heaven. And I said, yeah, you're right. The next thing he says is, who practices divination. Divination is a practice of, you can use pendulums. It covers a lot of different things. But it's a practice to find things, divination. Bob, you brought up the other night about what about water dowsing, it's called. That's the German word. Most people call it witching for water. It's where you use a fruit tree branch, like a forked branch, a cherry branch, or a peach branch. Now they actually have, I've heard of them having little metal sticks like that fold up. Yeah, dowsing rods. and they wear them on their belt and get them out. You know, a lot of not all, but some well drillers use it. And what it is they use that. It's a form of divination, which is why it says here, let no one be found among you that practices divination. Um, they walk along, and when they get over a site which would make a good well, or what happens is all of a sudden, as they carry it like this, the end of the rod, the branch, comes down. I mean, it pulls straight down, and those that have that so-called gift can tell you, even if it's a good spot, it's maybe an okay spot, but boy, this is really a good spot, and you'll get good water here. Some of them even tell people how many gallons per minute they're going to get out of that site, and only certain people can do it. They call it having the gift, and it's usually passed down generational from father to son, and so forth. But it's a form of divination, and God forbids that. Don't use divination. In some cultures, even in our culture, people use different things. They swing like a pendulum. Some people have practiced that with pregnant women. In this Pennsylvania Dutch area, sometimes at a baby shower, somebody will have a chain with something on it, and they'll hold it over the woman's stomach and be able to, or hope or claim that they are, tell you what sex the baby's going to be. It's going to be a boy or a girl. That's practicing divination. So that's one of the things that we're not to do. Or a sorcery, somebody that's into sorcery, which is a form of witchcraft. A number of these things are just different terms for different forms of witchcraft, which is using powers that come from wicked spirits to do certain things, to learn certain things. In Revelation, it talks about people that use sorcery will not be allowed into heaven. It lists a whole bunch of people that he says that if they do these things, they won't be there. Now, people that have done that and asked for forgiveness will be there. Don't get me wrong, any of these things can be forgiven. In Revelation, sorcery is connected with drugs. Because even in a lot of cultures, sorcerers, witches, warlocks, they use sorcerers. They use different potions, like they might make a love potion to be used to attract somebody to you of the opposite sex or of the same sex nowadays. But the Greek word pharmaca is used for sorcery in the book of Revelation. And pharmaca is where we get our word, English word pharmacy from, which has to do with drugs. So we know that that's true. Now, and keep in mind, this isn't just like pagan nations. Years ago when I was young, most of this stuff, not all of it, but a lot of this stuff you would hear about happened somewhere on the mission field among pagan people, like, in Africa and Haiti, in Asia, and other cultures. They're big into this stuff. It wasn't too well known in this country. Not that it didn't happen, but it wasn't out in the open. But now all this stuff is very much out in the open. One who interprets omens. You've probably seen movies already where somebody took the entrails of an animal and they went through them, and then they would read those entrails and tell people. Again, it's telling people, giving them information that they're wanting to know. One who engages in witchcraft. There's a lot of different kinds of witchcraft, and basically it's divided in two parts. There's white witchcraft and there's black witchcraft. White witchcraft was used by a lot in this area, and we talked a little bit about this last night with what were called powwows, or they used to call them healers. in this greater area where we live, Lancaster County included, there are people that are healers, they're called, because they didn't used to have doctors. So, like if you had a sick child or something, or you had a wart and you wanted it removed, or different things like that, you would call somebody that you knew had the gift of being a powwow. Powwow has nothing to do with Indians and powwows. Okay, I just want to make that clear. Since I'm part Indian, we don't want to, down them. Indian powwows is like a celebration. Powwowers had to do with, it was a combination of witchcraft, white witchcraft, because it wasn't the dark side, but white witchcraft, which used, like a powwower would set up a picture of Jesus. He would use certain scriptures and read scripture, but he would also do incantations, or we had some in my family background, and I remember old Mammy, we call her Mammy Nace, she was a powwower. My mom would never let her near us as kids, because she said, she's a powwower, I don't want her doing that to my kids. So my mom protected us. I didn't know what a powwower was, but she said, well, she does incantations and things, and heals people and all that, and it did work, okay. And then farmers would pay them, because people didn't have much money, so they would pay them by giving them, a chicken, or giving them, a dozen eggs, or whatever, for doing their work. So that's white witchcraft. Black witchcraft is more like satanic stuff. It's dealing with the supernatural, but it's the very dark side of the supernatural. Now, in a sense, that's a play on words, because all witchcraft is dark, but some of it seems to be very light, and it's not, doesn't seem to be dealing with demons, but it really is, because they're behind all of this stuff. One time back in the 70s, and we'll take a break soon. One time back in the 70s, when I was a long-haired hippie preacher in New York, and we had several coffee houses where young people came in. Well, they weren't all young, some of them were in their 20s and 30s, but there was a lot of hippies, there was a lot of bikers, prostitutes, people into drugs, and we saw lots of people, just tons of people come to Christ and change. And so this one gal, it was a young couple, in fact, he was the electrician for a lot of the work in my house back in the 70s, because all these hippies helped me build my house. Delivery trucks used to think it was an Amish barn raising, because we all had beards and long hair. And they used to say, because my neighbor was building a barn at the same time, and they're like, is this the Hilby barn? And I said, no, this is the Mummert house. But it looked like a barn, because we used a lot of those materials. But Missy and Jerry, they were having a lot of problems at their house. They lived in North York, right off of Route 30, and strange things happening. So I met with them, especially her, and I said, well, what's happening? She said, well, things are moving. She said, in like last week, there was a field across from their house. She said, I was over across the street walking the dog, and when I turned around and I looked at our house up in our attic window, I saw myself sitting there as an old woman. I was like, wow, okay. And so she told me different things that were going on. So I said, well, do you have any objects in your house that are like maybe from some occultic thing? And she said, well, I have this beautiful tapestry right inside the door on a table, like you're coming to my house. She said, I guess that could be a problem. And I'm like, well, why would that be a problem? I mean, I'm looking for other stuff. Well, she said we have a Ouija board. She started out with that. I said, well, you need to get rid of that, because that's demonic big time. Spirits work through that thing. So I said, you need to get rid of that. And then, so I think that's the first thing we did. Yeah, we didn't even get to the black cloth the second time I met with her. That's right. And so I said, you need to get rid of that. So, okay, so a week later I said, well, did you get rid of it? She said, I know this sounds crazy. So, well, we put it in the garbage, but the next day it was back in the house, and I'd heard that before. So I said, okay. I said, you need to take that, and you need to just destroy it, like break it up or burn it or something. But anyway, get rid of it. So she did. So stuff was still going on. So then she told me about this black tapestry, and I said, well, why would you think that that's a problem? She said, well, and I didn't know this. I mean, this blew me away. She said, well, my grandmother is the Grand Witch of York County. And I'm like, oh, well, that changes the game. And she said, she gave me that tapestry at one time, and that's the cloth that they used on the altar. And I'm like, well, no wonder you're having problems in your house. I said, you need to get rid of that. Do you have anything else? I said, you need to get anything connected with her and witchcraft and get rid of it. Like, destroy it. And so about 2 nights later, we got a knock on our door, and I went to the door, and she and Jerry were there, and they had a whole bag full of stuff. They brought it to my house. And I'm like, what the heck is wrong with you two? I'm like, I don't want it at my house. So we took the stuff out in the backyard in the garden, and we made a big fire, and we burned all of it, and she confessed all this stuff, and we cut the cords through the name of Jesus and by his blood to separate her and him from all of that. It was mostly working against her. And that really ended it, And Chris just reminded me of something. I brought that story up today. She said, she never became an old woman sitting in a window because she died of cancer when she was like in her late 40s. And so that's interesting. So she said, Satan's really lying when he showed her that picture because she didn't get to be an old woman. But anyway, so the objects that are used in witchcraft are not good, and you don't want them around. One other time, I got a call from a pastor in York, and they had a man in their church that was causing a lot of problems. He was acting erratic. He would stand up in church and shout things. And it was like he was going crazy. And he said, and the thing about this guy is that he's never been that way before. He actually was a missionary in Dutch New Guinea, and a very good one. But now something's wrong with him. So he said, I know you know about stuff about warfare. Everybody used to call me, I don't know why. But anyway, he said, would you be willing to meet with him? And I said, yeah, sure, I guess. I mean, since he was a missionary, he needs help. So I met with this guy, and he was a very, very nice man. I mean, he was very normal when I met with him. And they had taken him to the York Hospital 2 or 3 times and put him in the psych ward because of disturbances in the neighborhood or at church. And so I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on with this guy. And he had a business at that time, and he was doing well. And so I got to talking to him, and I kept praying when I'm talking to him, Lord, you got to give me some wisdom here. I mean, help me get my finger on what the problem is. Well, I found out that his mother was very involved in the occult. She was not a Christian. She was very involved in the occult. And I thought, but that shouldn't affect him. She wasn't that way when he was a kid, so it's not an ancestral thing. So finally the Lord brought something to my mind, and I said to him, did you bring anything back from the mission field, like artifacts or whatever from New Guinea? Because New Guinea was a country which was, they had a lot of like tribes, a lot of headhunters, and they weren't headhunters when he was there, but they used to be. So he was with these people, and he said, yeah, I got, a lance, and I've got, he named different things, some pottery, different things. Because I'm trying to find something that had a connection to evil. And a lance wouldn't do that, some of the other stuff he said. They said, and then I have this, he said it's like a bag, you can wear it around your neck, and it's just sort of weird looking, and the guy gave it to me and he told me, just to take it and keep it and don't look in it, like what's in this. It's like a leather little sack. And I said, oh. I said, I believe that might be a talisman, which we would call a medicine bag. I said, who gave that to you? Who was he? He said, well, he was the local witch doctor. I said, bingo. He said, you're out of your mind. You brought that home? I said, where do you have it? He said, it's in my house. I said, well, you need to go home and you need to get that thing and you need to destroy it. You need to burn it or something. That just don't put it in the garbage. And so he said he would. And I said, now, once you do that, we'll meet again. So we met like 2 days later. And I said, now we need to pray because you need to confess having that in your house. You need to having that in your possession. I said, that thing has demonic power. I said, if you don't think spirits didn't come with that thing, you're crazy. He said, I just never thought about it. And I said, well, I'm thinking about it. I'm telling you. So we prayed a prayer of confession and all that. And he never had any more trouble. In fact, a couple of years later, I was at Lancaster Bible College where I graduated from at a conference, and I'm walking out the door, and I hear a voice behind me, and some guy said, that's the man that saved my life and my marriage and my family. And I looked around, and here it was him, and he was telling his wife and his 2 daughters that I was the guy that, because they never met me, that set me free. I said, well, I'm not the guy that saved anything. I said, God saved you. He said, well, I meant to use you. I said, okay, he used me. But I said, there are certain objects that you don't want to have in your possession. Because especially things that have to do with religions that are very demonically connected. Like any pagan religion is very demonically connected with spirits. Any objects from Native American religion. Not all Native American objects. I have quite a few in my house, but nothing connected with religion because they worship spirits. They are afraid of spirits. They're connected to spirits. We had a lady come to church here many years ago who had been married to a Sioux Indian. And of course, I was like excited to be part Native American myself, and I love the Sioux tribe. Been to a lot of the reservations, and but she and her 3 kids, who were half Sioux, were having a lot of problems in their home. Things were happening. Kids were seeing things and beings and stuff in the house. Things are moving. So I met with her, and I said, "Were you involved with Native American religion when you were on the reservation?" It was on Pine Ridge, and she said, yeah, very much. My husband and I, they're divorced now. We were very involved in Native religion. And his parents warned us not to get involved, but we did. And I said, did you bring stuff here? She said, well, yeah, I have a lot of stuff that, when I moved here. So we made a list of things she needed to get rid of, and we confessed that, and you know what? Peace came to the house. The enemy disrupts things, and he brings his presence into our house if we have in our possession things that we ought not to have. I remember a teenage girl one time that I met with, her and her dad, because she had been a really good kid, and all of a sudden she was like turning into a rebel. And 1 Samuel 15:23 says, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. In other words, if you're involved in witchcraft, stuff's going to happen. But if you're involved in rebellion, it's the same as witchcraft. And this kid was becoming, he was like 15, becoming very rebellious. So I was trying to find out what the problem was. And she had on like a leather wristband thing. It was like a little bracelet. And she kept fooling around with this thing. The whole time I was talking to her, I mean, it was very noticeable. She was just like playing with this thing. I'd say things, and she's holding on to it. And I said, "What's with your leather little wristband there?" She said, "Nothing." And I said, "Well, why are you like seem to be attracted to that thing, and you're hanging on to it, playing with it. She said, I don't know. I said, well, where did it come? Where did you get it? And she said, well, we were in California and I was on the beach and some guy came and gave it to me. I said to her, Dad, well, when did all this stuff start happening? I said, when we came home from California. So, I mean, some things are just pretty easy to figure out. I said, I think that's the problem right there. So I told them they need to get, well, I really like it. I said, well, yeah, but it's causing me a lot of problems. And I explained what was going on. There was a demonic attachment to that object for some reason. Maybe the guy cursed it and put a curse on anybody that went around handing it out. So anyway, I told him to get rid of it. The same thing happened. It happened to Missy and the Ouija board. They threw it in the garbage and it was back in the house the next day and she didn't bring it in. So, you know, the enemy is very powerful, and so Satan's playground and all of these things is not something to play with. It's a dangerous area. Okay, well, we'll get started again because our time's winding down. But let me finish the ones that are in here. We talked about witchcraft, casting spells. You know, that's a very real thing. People do that. I've been connected over the years with a couple different pastors in Haiti, and of course, demonic activity is huge in Haiti. Haiti is the only nation that I'm aware of that its leaders have dedicated, and this is years ago, but many of its leaders have repeated this. They have dedicated the land, the island of Haiti, to Satan, because not all the people there worship Satan, but the leaders were into that. Because see, the reason some people like them and some people that get involved in Satanism, they do it because Satan promises power to people that worship him, and so they wanted power, and they would have an animal sacrifice in Haiti. They used a pig. And they sacrificed it as a national event. That happened twice in their history that I'm aware of, in recent history. And but anyway, voodoo, which is a serious form of witchcraft, is very big in Haiti. And casting spells on people. They'll pay a witch or a medium, a high priest, priestess or priest of voodoo that practices voodoo they'll pay them to cast a spell on somebody they don't like, and they work. Okay, like we just think, oh, that's nothing. No, they work. I know a pastor in Haiti whose daughter died because they believe that a voodoo priestess put a spell on her. She got very ill, and the doctors couldn't do anything. So casting spells. I'm going to say something controversial, but you know me, I say things controversial. Harry Potter is a series. It's not a good thing, and I know a lot of parents, you know, their kids are into it. And, you know, they got the books and all that. The hardcore Satanists have called, and this is back when it came out, years back. I remember reading that many of the hardcore Satanists referred to it as their kindergarten for children, to get them interested in occultic things. And I've had some people disagree with me on that. And like I told one guy, I said, well, you're entitled to your opinion, that's fine, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And the facts are that series is based on witchcraft. It's about casting spells. It's about all sorts of things. Fort Hope College, you know, is a school where kids in that series would go to learn witchcraft, how to cast spells and all kinds of stuff. So it's not a really good series. I had one man said to me, "Well, you know, it's just like fantasy. I mean, like, yeah, but the fantasy is based on real facts of what happens and what people in witchcraft are into, with wizards and witches and all of that stuff." And he used excuse, he said, well, what about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis? Like Lewis is the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There's the witch in there that causes everything to freeze and everything's frozen up. And I said, yeah, there are witches in there, but it's not teaching you that they're good. It's teaching that they're the bad ones, and that Aslan is the good one. He's actually a picture of Christ. It's teaching biblical truth, and there are bad things in the world. That's true, but we're not teaching kids that it's a good thing to get into. And the lady that wrote that, has always denied that she was involved in the occult. But many experts have said that they and I do too. I find that hard to believe because she knows things that she put in that book, which are very factual, in fact, everything. And how would she know that unless she was very involved at some point in her life or was very close to somebody that was very involved? So in all of this, I just always like to say to parents, be careful what you let your kids be a part of. A lot of modern day cartoons, it's phenomenal. Cartoons back in the day, with Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, and they were like the Road Runner, and it was, cats chasing the mice, and, it was just like fun stuff. It was violent, they're trying to kill each other. I can't minimize that. But now, a lot of cartoons are based on evil, based on occultic things. I remember years ago one time, I just watched a couple cartoons, and I remember saying to Chris, this isn't real. These things aren't just funny. These things are evil. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So I tell parents all the time, be careful what you let your kids or your grandchildren watch or participate in or be a part of or read. Because young minds are inquisitive and they're believing, and so you don't want to scare them. People always ask me about all the time about Halloween, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but like I say to them, do you understand that Halloween is not a good holiday? Not for Christians. It just isn't. It started out as a pagan practice, and a lot of pagan and occultic things are connected to it. And the history of it, we don't sort of get that today. We see it as parades, we see it as parties, we see it as trick or treat night, and all of that. And people say, well, I don't see any harm in it. Well, there is harm in it. Kids are sort of scared of things anyway. So why would we celebrate a night that's all about demons and witches and warlocks and bloodletting and graves and if you think about it, it just doesn't add up. We had a girl. You'll get a kick out of this. There was a girl that went to Gettysburg College, and that's back when I worked with a Christian organization at Gettysburg College for like 29 or 30 years. So we had a lot of kids that did. This one girl, beautiful young girl, came there as a freshman and became part of our Christian fellowship, came here to church, and then she transferred to Messiah College and ended up being roommates with my daughter up there. But I was teaching on Halloween one Halloween season when she was here at church, and she took what I said and that you really shouldn't have anything to do with Halloween. It's one of the two biggest nights for people that are heavily involved in Satanism. Human sacrifices are done at that time, and the other one is Christmas, and another one is Easter, because they like to mock the celebration of Christ's birth and his death. But anyway, they claim it as their holiday. And people that I've helped to get out of Satanism and heavy occult activities all wonder why churches and Christians celebrate Halloween. At first, because I used to years ago, and was like everybody. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Then when I started working with these people and helping them get free, they're like, why do churches have Halloween parties? This is Satan's holiday. This is our holiday. Why? I understand why you celebrate Christmas and Easter, but what would you have to do with this? People die on this holiday every year, and parades are all about bloodletting and people wearing scary costumes and scaring the crap out of little kids. What's the point in that? So anyway, I'm not going to say a lot about it. I tell people it's up to them what they choose to do. But this girl at college, she decided that that's it. She's not having anything to do with Halloween. Well, anyway, she married a guy from Messiah, and they eventually moved to Texas. And Chris and I just, one time when we were down there a couple of years ago, we called her up, and they came and they had dinner with us at a good Texas beef restaurant. And she said, "You still teach about Halloween?" I said, "Yeah." And a year ago, she texted us and she said she has 3 kids and they're all grown now and married. And she said, "All my kids, as it was getting close to Halloween," this is like a year or 2 ago, she said, they asked me again, "Tell us again, why is it that we don't celebrate Halloween?" Because they never celebrated Halloween, and now they're having kids of their own. And she said, "I told them, because Pastor Bill said so." I said, I hope you told him more than that. She said, "Well, I did, because I have all my notes from back then, and I told him about the darkness and not of the night, but this spiritual darkness that's connected with it." So she said, they said, "Okay, we just want to make sure." So anyway, they're in Texas and they don't celebrate Halloween. And a lot of parents nowadays don't. I know at a lot of schools, and parents can keep their kids out of school or do something else when they're having a Halloween party, because a lot of Christians are sort of getting the word, and not all, but a lot of them don't want their kids to participate. You can do other stuff, and that's what I told churches. Instead of having a Halloween party, have a Bible party and have them dress up like biblical characters or something. And you can still play games and all that, but keep all the scary stuff out of it. Anyway, other things not to participate in is being a medium or a spiritist or one who consults the dead. Mediums are people that, as the name sounds, are go-betweens between this life and the spirit world. They contact the spirit world. So parts of that are not going to fortune tellers. God tells us, "I'll tell you about the future." Don't go to fortune tellers. Don't go to mediums. Mediums also are big on what we call necromancy, which is communication with the dead. And they even do it on TV. I've seen shows, where they have a medium and somebody says, "Oh, no, we're talking to my grandfather. It sounds just like him." They ask them questions, and it's nothing but a medium that is consulting a demonic spirit who is imitating the dead person, and they do that. They know how to do that. And so anyway, don't have anything to do with that. Necromancy, consulting the dead, or trying to consult the dead. They're dead. They're not talking to us, and it's not them anyway, even if some medium makes it sound like the dead person. Spiritists are the same. There are people that deal with spirits. There's a whole lot of other things that, in fact, let me get my whole. This is an amazing book, Exposing and Confronting Satan and Associates. This was put together by a guy and a bunch of experts that have to do with counseling people that have been involved in supernatural things. And anyway, it's got a whole list in here of some things that we're not to be a part of. I'm just going to read a lot of them, because there's probably like 100 of them. But levitation is another one. That happens at a lot of parties, especially with teenage girls. And I'm going to say that there's a thing about teenage, well, even tweens, girls that are like 11, 12, 13, 14. If you ever went into any of the big bookstores over the years, like that were at the mall and stuff, if you would go back to the section where they had a lot of occultic books, because they had a whole section, almost every time I went there, I'd wander back that way, and I'd always find the same thing. I'd find anywhere from 2 or 3 to 6 or 8 girls that age sitting on the floor reading these books. Not all, but a lot of them have attraction to that kind of stuff through a friend or whatever, and it's not a good thing for them to be involved in. Tarot cards, card laying is another thing. A lot of it, most of it has to do with trying to find out information from a source that God doesn't want you to get information from, because it's a false source, and because the enemy is a liar. And so we have to be careful with that. I have another list here. Let me pull this up. Here we go. Better list. Astrology. I've met many people that they have to read astrology every day. Like when people used to get newspapers, there was always a section with your sign. And I've met many people, they say to me, well, what's your sign? I say the cross. No, I mean your sign. I said, I don't have a sign. Well, yeah, you do. When's your birthday? And I don't usually tell them because I don't want to go down that path with them. Because they're referring to the zodiac. Let me tell you what the zodiac is. I taught a whole series on this several years ago. And so many people came to Christ. Well, I did it twice over the years. And it's about the gospel in the sky. In the sky. God has written the whole message of the gospel from Genesis to Revelation in the sky. And it's in the signs which have been twisted. Because see, Satan does everything God does, he does it backwards. The signs that people call the zodiac are actually major constellations that God put there when he put the stars in place. And he knows them all by name. And they were there to tell the gospel to the whole world without even when they don't have a Bible. It's written there for them. Let me turn to Psalm, let me see. Not quite. Psalm 19. And this is what it says. The heavens declare the glory of God. Now listen to these words. Declare. The skies proclaim. That's words that talk about speaking. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hand. Day after day, they pour forth speech. They're communicating. And night after night, they display knowledge. When you see them, there's knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into the ends of all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. It's talking about something, some stars in the sky that are declaring something. They're saying something. They're communicating something. And what it is God wrote in the sky, in the 12 major constellations. Each one of them has 3 minor constellations that support it. And I'll just give you one. Well, Virgo is one. It starts in the beginning. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15 is Virgo. It's the virgin with a male child. That's a picture of the Virgin Mary with the child Jesus. And Orion, the mighty hunter, is a picture also of what's said in Genesis chapter 3. when God was speaking to Satan and pronouncing a curse on him because of what he did to Eve, he said to Satan, "You will bruise his heel," referring to Christ, referring to the coming cross, where Christ's heel was bruised. "But he, Christ, will crush your head." Do you ever see Orion, the picture of Orion in the sky? He's called the mighty hunter, that's Christ. He has a club raised, there's a serpent at his heel striking his heel, and he's getting ready to bring the death club down on the serpent. And all of the constellations and even the names of the stars. Now here's the interesting thing. They have changed, some people have changed the meanings and stuff over the years. But all the ancient star maps in the world have the same names of stars and the same 12 major constellations and 3 minor constellations from all the different cultures in the world. Their ancient maps are all the same, and they all say the same thing. Why? Because when God scattered the nations, they took the knowledge that they had, that God taught them about those constellations, and that's His word declared in the sky. So it goes from the promise of the coming of Christ the whole way through the cross, the mighty hunter, defeating Satan, and goes into the big and little dippers, which have to do with eternity, heaven and hell. What the enemy has done is he's changed the meaning of them into signs for people they call it the zodiac, which is not God's word for it, and it's what people use to determine their life. They read the stars, and God says that's an abomination to me. So I've met so many people over the years that they're always into, I got to read my zodiac. I got to read my sign. Leave it alone. It belongs to the enemy. It's not good. Anyway, I don't really have time to go over all of these, but anyway, yeah.
Good question.
Yeah.
Older people like you and I.
Yeah. I
Lot
know we're old. Don't rub it in.
A lot of people that I have known, used to know,
Yeah.
that use the almanac
Yes.
to plant.
Yep. That's another thing.
Is that
Thank you. Yeah, it's not good. Because it's not good. It works sometimes. See, the one thing you have to remember, people sometimes think when I'm teaching on this, or somebody else is teaching or wrote a book on this, that we're saying stuff doesn't work. Quite the contrary. It all works very well. But it allows the enemy to get a hold in your life because you're using something that's not coming from God. It's coming from the enemy.
I know that the basic thing was that the signs of the moon,
Yes.
the different stages of the
Right.
moon.
Yeah.
If you were planting potatoes, that was one.
Right.
If you're planting a
Right.
crop that was going like corn,
Yep.
it's going to grow above. you
Right.
planted
Yep.
different.
Yeah. But see, that's going by what the moon is supposedly saying. Yeah, but that's all owned by the enemy. You know, don't be terrified by the signs in the sky. And so forth. So God is just warning us, don't do things like that. Another thing is images and stuff. False gods, or just images. Somebody asked me, and people always ask, like, what about a crucifix? And because a lot of our people here at church were raised in the Catholic Church, and crucifixes, of course, are big there. It's not really demonic, but it's not really truth, because Jesus isn't on a cross. He's risen. He's alive. He's seated by the right hand of God the Father. So to have or to display Christ always on the cross is not a good thing. It's not evil. It's just not really truthful. Jesus isn't on a cross anymore. He was on a cross. He was crucified, then buried, and then he rose again. So you'll notice, like a cross, the big cross that we have in church, it's empty, and it's that way for a reason, because we believe that he's risen and he's seated on the right hand of God the Father, and he's coming back again. So just, it might seem like a small thing, but you know, um, one other thing that I've always thought was curious is automatic writing. Some famous rock stars that were also songwriters, they they wrote some of their songs, admittedly, by automatic writing. What is automatic writing? Well, it's where you don't write. You have a pen in your hand or a pencil, and you have it at the paper, and a force, which would be a demonic force, takes over your hand and writes for you. That's why it's called automatic writing. You're not actually doing it. When we had our coffee house in New York, there used to be a thing on Philadelphia Street called the York Art Academy, and our coffee house wasn't too far away from that. So we had a lot of students from the Art Academy come into our coffee house, and then we had a church on Sunday morning, a hippie church basically, and a lot of them came to that, Agape Chapel. And we had two girls from New Jersey that were friends, Lorraine and Julie. Julie was an Italian, from an Italian family, and quite a number of her aunts were very much into the occult. They were fortune tellers and mediums and stuff. But both Julie and Lorraine could do automatic writing, and they did it, and they thought it was okay. And I had to teach them. They thought it was fun. I mean, it's not okay. What's moving your hand? Well, I don't know. It just moves. I'm like, well, I'm telling you what's moving your hand is it's a wicked spirit. It's not the Holy Spirit. They both became Christians, and they renounced that, and we prayed, they confessed it, and they were free of it after that. But it was an interesting thing. Anyway, what else did I want to cover? Last night I mentioned something, and Sarah back there talked to me a little bit about it, and that's cutters. That's bigger than a lot of people realize. She's seen it because she's a secretary in a middle school. Again, it's usually girls. I've never had a guy that was a cutter. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but a lot of girls do that where they cut their arm or they'll cut their thigh, someplace where it can't be seen, and they'll just take a little blade and they're not big cuts, but they cut till it bleeds. And I've dealt with a lot of them over the years, asked them why they do it. They said it's to get relief. They feel like relief when it happens because they have like a lot of tension, a lot of pressure, and then they do that. They learn it from somebody else usually. And I always explain to them when I meet with them, I say, do you realize that when you're cutting yourself, you're making a blood sacrifice to Satan? That's what's happening. And he's gaining more and more control in your life. I said, you do it now more than you did in the beginning. Oh yeah, I used to just do it once in a while. And they have to increase it. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it leads to them slitting their wrists and trying to commit suicide. Anytime you give what we call ground or legal right to the enemy, you have to pay the piper, as the saying goes. He doesn't give you anything for nothing. He doesn't give you power for nothing. He doesn't give you relief for nothing. God gives everything for nothing. And it lasts and it satisfies. Satan doesn't give anything that satisfies. And there are always strings attached. There's consequences that are attached. So, let me close because our time's almost up. By saying, if you have been involved in anything that we've talked about or anything that you suspected is connected to the enemy, the best way to deal with it, or really the only way I know to deal with it, is just, it's a simple prayer. You just confess to God what you were involved in. I was involved in divination of some sort. I did this. I did that. I didn't know. I played with a Ouija board. I was at parties where we did that. I wasn't, but I'm just saying, you say that to God. I did that. I did pendulum swinging. I did levitation. It was a party. I didn't know it was anything wrong with it. Whatever. You just come to God and you say, God, this is what I did, and I confess it to you as sin. It's not something that you approve of, and so therefore it's sin. And I confess that it's sin, and I renounce it in Jesus' name. And by his blood, I cut myself off from any effect of it. And that's basically it. And great freedom comes from that. So be sure to do that if you suspect that you've been involved in anything like that. And there's so much more stuff. I mean, there are lists that are double page, two sides of things that people are involved in. I tried to hit a lot of the major things that people have been involved in or get involved in. Another thing is, and I almost forgot this, and I did mention this a little talking about my anger. We also can inherit ancestral problems with the enemy. In Exodus chapter 20, when God is giving the law to Moses, he says that the sins, and let me explain this quickly, the sins of the fathers will be visited on the children to the third and fourth generation. That's a pretty long spell. The first generation is your parents, the second is your grandparents, the third is your great-grandparents, and the fourth generation is your great-great-grandparents. So something that they did, the effects of it, not the sin. You're not going to answer for their sin. They have to answer for their own sin. He's not saying that. But the effects or the consequences of their sin in certain areas has opened the door to their family line for the enemy to be involved. And so, for example, the best example I always know how to use is addictions, particularly like alcohol, because we know that one well. If you have a father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, somebody back your family line that was an alcoholic, generally you can trace that down through your family. The one that you know about wasn't the first one. If your grandfather or your father was an alcoholic, probably your grandfather was too, or your great-grandfather. Sometimes it skips a generation. But some families have followed that back, way back. Why is that? One of the first converts at this church when I planted it back in 1982 was a 19-year-old kid that lived down the alley from where our first little building was. And he came to church with his grandmother, and he came to know Christ. And I found out that he was an alcoholic, and he had demolished 12 vehicles, and he was only 19. And I used to meet with him because I didn't hardly have any people, so I had a lot of time in my head. And we'd spend hours together every day, and I was discipling him, and he was growing, and I said, "How did you become an alcoholic?" And he said, "Well, people back in my family were," and he didn't even know about this principle. He just said, "There are other alcoholics in my family." And he said, "My parents belonged to the Gettysburg Country Club, and when we used to go there to dinners and dances and stuff on the weekend, when they would get up to dance, I was about 5 years old, and I remember I took one of their glasses of alcohol and I drank it. What was left, it was just a little left." And he said, "My first drink, I absolutely loved it." Now that's not normal. The first beer I had, I spit out because I was anticipating my first beer, and it just wasn't good. I didn't like it, and that happens to a lot of people. You have to learn how to drink, but he didn't have to learn how to drink. It was instant with him. And as a kid, he was becoming an alcoholic. By the time he was in his early teens, he was already an alcoholic, drinking secretly and stuff. But anyway, that guy got saved. His name was Jim. And he got saved and discipled in the faith there in our little church. And he then decided to go to college. And he went to college to be an alcohol and an abuse counselor. And that kid, who was like a loser in everybody's mind, pulled a 4.0 average in college. I mean, he was very smart. But it came down through his family line. I've seen sexual problems come down through the family line. Some men that really have a problem with lust, pornography, and other things, when we trace it back, their dad was a womanizer. Their grandfather was a woman. I know a guy right now, he's that way. He's unfaithful to his wife. His dad was unfaithful to his mother. His grandfather, who was a farmer, used to always be after the milkmaids and women in the area, and even his grandfather. That's 4 generations. You know, are they all just bad guys? No, it's an ancestral sin. I tried to teach this young guy that, but he didn't believe me. And so now he's involved in it. So, so me, my anger, my rage that I talked about at the beginning, that was an ancestral problem. That was on me when I was a little kid, from the time I was born, until I found out where it came from. And then I said, it stops with me, Lord, it stops with me. I confess. So if you need to confess ancestral sin, the way you do that is the way it's done in the Bible. David did it, Nehemiah did it, others did it, but they simply prayed, you just go to God and say, I and my forefathers, my ancestors have sinned against you in this area, an area where you're struggling. And I'm confessing my sin and their sin because I want to be free. Set me free. I cut it off in Jesus' name and get free. I mean, it sounds simple, but it is simple, really. But anyway, once you know what to do. All right, we'll be back tomorrow night with more. Again, Friday night we'll deal with just questions that you have. We'll have a good discussion. Okay. All right. Thank you. Go get your kids or your grandkids.